Welcome to this episode, Your Places or Mine, with me, John Goodall, Architecture Editor of Country Life.
And me, Clive and John. I'm a visiting professor at Cambridge.
We run this podcast to try and talk about some of the things, the fascinating buildings that Clive and I see, the fascinating places we go to. And we end up having lots of interesting discussions about how they might fit in with wider stories and who the individuals are that we've come across in the course of visiting them. And this is an attempt to bottle up some of that conversation. We hope it's of interest to more than just ourselves, because we really enjoy it. And Clive, yes.
This is the royal episode, isn't it, John? We've both been to this place, but not together.
Indeed. We are going to talk today about Romania and King Charles's long-standing interest and engagement with Romania.
We think he might be, as we're speaking.
Actually, as we speak now. But it's something that in your book, Clive, about the king and architecture.
Oh, you mean King Charles III? 40 years of architecture, which is just at my hand.
It's recently remaindered in all second-hand bookshops.
Published by Triglass Books. Yes.
Of course, of which Clive is one of the leaders of that august publisher. But it's something you've written about in there, and his long-standing interest, because it reflects it's inspired and fed one whole aspect of the king's interests.
Yes, I think in many ways it combines a lot of the things that the king is interested in one kind of package, which he's very keen on. Do you remember the word holistic was used much at one point? And so this is a sort of representation of everything that he really passionately believes. He feels very strongly, I think I can speak for him on this because I've read quite a lot about it, he feels very strongly that the West has lost its way, and industrial farming and I suppose, everything that's happened since the Industrial Revolution really has led it down the wrong path. And that people have got detached from nature. And nature is very, very important to him, because our relationship with nature, which can be seen in so many ways, even in sacred geometry,
which is another of his interests.
That creates harmony, and harmony is has become a very important word, which symbolises this kind of wholeness and particularly man's relationship with nature. And so we've gone terribly wrong in Britain, for example, with all our industrial farming practices.
He would argue, and this,
yes,
but Romania,
and our terrible loss of biodiversity and wildlife and butterflies, all going out of the window. But in Romania is like Britain used to be, around about 1800, or at least this part of Romania, Transylvania.
Well, it's quite interesting. I mean, even in the early 20th century, when Country Life was writing about peasant culture and things, it is quite interesting how often Romania turns up, even then, in the magazine as a subject of illustrated articles. Representing
folk art.
Well, sort of folk art, but also sort of showing a sort of peasant lifestyle as it once was. I mean, that people,
well, that's interesting.
Looking back at seeing how. I mean, in that context, Country Life, there's definitely something nostalgic about it. But I mean, the king first went to Romania in.
Well, I suppose one could say that. I mean, thinking of Götze for example, or that. Movement at the turn of the 20th century.
The garden designer
Götze and writers, the various other writers. But there was an immense nostalgia for the disappearance of the British, the disappearance of the last vestige of the British equivalent of what you can see in Romania, which was the rural, what they called the rural civilization of the peasant English or something like that. There's a concept that there were these peasants. Well, of course, that sounds like a rather pejorative term. But what they meant was people who were self-sufficient and living in the countryside, being able to feed themselves.
Dignified by their independence somehow from all the other things that seemed to be corrupting society.
Yes, and getting pleasure from the fact that they were making a lot of things by hand, from the carts. They had immense knowledge of the different types of wood and embroidered smocks that they wore on Sundays and that type of thing, with beehives.
Well, what's so interesting, as Prince of Wales, King Charles went to Romania first, presumably in the early 1990s?
Yes, that's right. I think it was an official visit, as far as I remember. But he just absolutely fell for it because he could see that this represented everything. We ought to describe what it's like in Transylvania.
Yes, and also it's a particular part of Romania, isn't it? It is this area of Transylvania, which is historically...
That escaped. I mean, a lot of Romania is not like this. And there were collectivized farms, which I don't think would be beautiful to our eyes at all, because they were simply, I mean, they really were industrial.
But I mean, Transylvania itself is this. I mean, it's a lyrically beautiful landscape, isn't it? It's
absolutely.
It's not exactly mountainous, but it's sort of semi-mountainous, woodland, rocky landscape, enormous expanses of meadow which are maintained by grazing, and it's punctuated by these villages, one of which Viscri we're going to be particularly talking about, which the king has been very involved in.
I mean, it is so rich in wildlife and wildflowers, it's impossible to miss. I was staying, I can't actually remember the village where I was staying, but I went for a walk of half an hour up to the top of a hill and down again. And you walk through these meadows, which are teeming with wildflowers and grasshoppers.
To a degree that's sort of slightly unbelievable, isn't
it? It's unbelievable. There's so many. I think there are many, many more species per square unit than there are in this country. And I came back, I remember it was a good thing I was wearing long trousers. It was quite warm, but the density of the meadow was quite difficult to walk through, but also I came back covered in sort of burrs and pollen and all these things. It was really magical. I'll never forget it.
And I mean, it's important to say that the character of this area has been created by very particular historical circumstances. That it's a sort of tract of wilderness, and in the mid-12th century, the King of Hungary invites in lots of settlers from the Mosel region and from Germany and from northern Europe to settle this area in order to create a buffer zone against the expansion of the Ottomans.
Yes.
And from the 12th century, there are this series of villages that are created with Saxon communities. And this is actually something that's being duplicated to a much wider area in Central and Eastern Europe. These German settlements, obviously right along the Baltic and things. But I
think we should explain. I mean, it's a very ethnically complex place, isn't it? Because there have been overlays. Right down until the 20th century, or possibly today, there would be manor houses that were Hungarian and villages that were Romanian, and so and then the Saxons came along. So it was all a very complicated mix.
Well, I may have misunderstood. I thought that much of Transylvania is a sort of wilderness when it is settled by the Saxons. But I mean, I suppose there must have been people there before. I've not really heard someone there before. Anyway, it's a
very long time ago. We're talking about, I think you said, the 12th century.
In the 12th century, and that these villages grow up, and
incredibly, they were still speaking German, weren't they?
Exactly, and it's like like what's happening in other parts of Eastern Europe.
It's like somewhere like Patagonia, where people still speak Welsh.
And it's worth saying that these villages develop around their churches, which are often on a high eminence within the village. And the churches themselves began in the 12th century. They develop in stone. They become enclosed by fortifications, and often those fortifications have towers in them, and those towers are used as storage rooms by the village community. So the churches themselves become a kind of an independent entity,
like a castle keep,
which
people could retreat into when they're attacked.
And the church,
stoutly defensive Saxon people,
and they contain these one of the things that's very characteristic of them is these gifts in the 16th century, from the 16th century onwards, of carpets which are being traded. So they're wonderful, hanging on the walls. These very early and rather wonderful carpets in some of these churches.
Carpets. They were trading with the Ottomans, despite the fact everyone was feeling threatened by them.
And at the Reformation, of course, these areas they become Lutheran, and they have a kind of tradition of fierce independence. The villages. I mean, I suppose living in these units, you become very independent. They enjoy great independence. They become Lutheran, and the churches continue to evolve in response to that. And when you go into many of them, there are these fantastic galleries that fill the interior,
yes.
And some of them preserve like other Lutheran churches, wonderful medieval schemes of painting and even an altarpiece I've seen.
I think the Saxons were successful, weren't they? And they had their own culture. They were very hard-working, or at least that was certainly the case, strikingly the case in the later period. So they were doing better than other people, but sticking to themselves.
And I think in the 18th century too, I mean, when you go to, we've mentioned Viscri already, I mean, when you go to it, what's very striking is the way that the village street, and the layout of the village street must be medieval, must be part of a planned design, but the farms are rebuilt in the 18th century and they take a very standardized form.
Yes.
So when you walk up the main street of Viscri, for example, which rises up and then there's a sort of juncture with one arm going up to the church, which is on the summit of the hill, with these steep roofs over the church, as you say, like a castle keep standing over the whole village. All the farms have been rebuilt, all the steadings have been rebuilt with effectively a wall with a gateway facing the street, and this village street is very broad to allow for cattle to graze and to be driven up and down. There's a stream running down the village street. But then you go through these broad gateways and then you're into little courtyards with a house on one side, there's a gable end facing the road of the house, and then there's a barn at the bottom.
Yes.
So each of these things is a little unit, and they're sort of charmingly classical. They're rendered in white, coloured, whitewashed, but they're sort of dignified, simple architecture, and very sort of handsome. And in Viscri itself, every morning and every evening, there's this wonderful moment where somebody goes from the very top of the village street. Everybody puts their cows out into the to graze, and then this person comes along and drives them all out into the pastures around the village, and you hear the clanking of bells, and everybody sweeps out, and then they move around the landscape and basically graze these these.
And then they find their own way back, don't they?
Well, I think they're all kept together with one. I mean, well, maybe they do wander.
Well,
but,
I mean,
but
they find their way. Well, certainly went to another village called Zalanpatak, which is another one where the king has got a habitation, and there they find their way back into their own stalls.
Goodness, I mean,
they just do it.
There is something terribly
with their bells clanging, as you said.
I mean, there is something very, very easy and kind of calming about it all, because they do sort of sweep up. But there's no hurry. There's no clock to watch. It's just happening in a sort of regimented, regular way.
Of course, it would be easy to sentimentalise, and
Indeed.
Can make comparisons with Marie Antoinette, who had
in the Petit Trianon,
the little village she had, where she'd go and be a milkmaid. Yes, with this, all these vessels made by Serve. To the highest possible quality, but pretending to have this very simple life. So we must be slightly careful. But John, I'd just like to say, tell a little story about how I first went to Transylvania, because it illustrates both the different cultural overlays and also particularly how unchanged it is. Because I went to a manor house called Malencrav with the Mihail Eminescu Trust, which was founded when Ceausescu was still president and Romania was communist. The trust was founded, I believe, by Roger Scruton, the philosopher who was very, very much an activist in trying to supply books behind the Iron Curtain at some peril. And the wonderful Jessica Douglas-Hume, who invited me out. And we were there because the manor house was going to become somewhere that people could go and stay. And so we were sort of getting it ready. I don't know whether I was doing very much, but anyway, there were
very uncharacteristic of
different people. There were different people, responsible for the library, and the wonderful decorator David Milinarik, who also his heritage is also Central European, was decorating. I think I might have helped move a few chairs around or something like that. But anyway, there was a time when I wasn't particularly needed. So I went with David's wife Martha for a walk in the woods, which of course would be a natural thing to do. We had an afternoon off. It's a beautiful country. So off we went to walk in these marvellous, I think, beech woods they were. And of course they're so huge and so few people go into them that it's very, very easy to get lost. And we did get completely lost. And, when the sun went down, you had no point of reference to see which way you... And, we wondered whether we were going to be in there all night. And, there are bears still in these forests. A matter of some concern. I mean, we probably only got lost for about an hour or something, but
it was still slightly alarming.
It's slightly alarming, but it sort of illustrated that this is a place so unlike, our very organised countryside over here. This is somewhere which is on a different scale and very underpopulated. Is the
and
other
when
thing.
was this before? Because I mean,
oh no, this is way after. I can't quite remember.
Because I mean, I think the other really important thing to say
early 2000s.
The 20th century, for all the sort of serenity of that landscape in those villages, has been extremely tumultuous in this part of the world. I mean, that Romania is affected, into 1919 by the First World War. That in the after the Second World War, Romania sides latterly with the Axis
on the wrong
powers,
side, didn't they, in the First World War,
and then is taken over, of course, by falls within the Russian sphere of influence, and the Saxon communities are persecuted. So they suffer terrible losses in the First World War. In the Second World War, they're sort of persecuted by Ceausescu and the communist authorities. Many of them are taken away to labour camps and never come back. And then towards the very end of Ceausescu's period of rule, the German government begins to offer head money for Saxon Germans to leave and go to West Germany. And I mean, there's this...
sort of buys them out.
Exactly. And
it's an extraordinary thing because they'd been there since the 12th century.
Exactly.
And so although they were kind of culturally and ethnically German, they hadn't been in Germany for a very, very long time.
And they moved back. I was told, I don't know the truth of this, but in many of these Lutheran villages, they literally gathered together in the church and then sort of voted as to what they were going to do. And so there was a massive exodus. Something somebody else told me there, which it was fascinating, and again, it was their personal recollection of it. Someone who'd stayed behind, they were a school teacher, they had a university degree, and they explained that the head money was more expensive for university teachers, but also when the German government paid the head money, part of the corruption of the system was that the individual who was leaving also then had to match this in some way and pay another sum of money to the government. And he said that because he was a university graduate, he was unable to afford to go, and so he is now an old man, but one of the very few people in that particular village near Viscri, a Saxon who remained behind. And so in the early 1990s, many of these villages actually, after having been impoverished, but with a stable population, those populations left, and over a period of time, these empty houses and buildings have been, taken over both by Romanians and Roma who have settled, and that in fact part of
a very different culture,
and one of the complexities of trying to save the villages just architecturally is been persuading people who've settled in these places who don't necessarily have an enormous amount of money to value the villages themselves. And so many of these churches became neglected very rapidly, and there I visited one where this the ambulanza, this another trust which does amazing work with volunteers, they were actually restoring a church where half the tower had collapsed and the building was, and they were completely replacing the roof. So there's lots of work going on at the same time to try and make a new population interested in these buildings.
Yes, it's very interesting. I mean, I have the sense, John, that you're rather down on Ceausescu.
Well, he doesn't sound a very attractive character, does he?
The one thing that he was that the regime was very good at doing was forest management.
Oh, really?
Because it didn't really have to be economic. I mean, it was, under the communist system, it was something they did, and so they did it very well, and they looked after the forests, and the planting was very good, and so on and so forth, and it was probably managed on a sustainable basis. I was told that the reason for this was that Ceausescu himself very much liked hunting bears. And so this whole forest system, if this is to be believed, was maintained for the benefit of the president's bear hunting. Of course, obviously, poor show. But since the fall of... So it means that these forests are actually... That is why they are so well preserved as they are now. But in fact, there were problems again after the fall of Ceausescu because there was a rush to privatise them and return them to their original owners. Well, the original owners, one, they were likely to live in Vienna or somewhere else, and it was a long way away and didn't really care much, and so might have sold them off or whatever. But equally, there weren't people on the ground to stop. I mean, it seems incredible, but illegal logging. You would have thought, to log a forest, you have to build roads and bring in enormous machines and stuff. But there was no sort of middle class. There was nobody to patrol these forests and protect them, and so. People have been very worried about that. Sorry, this might be a bit of a diversion, but it's really to illustrate that Romania, it had the Carpathian Forest, which is huge. It's not just in Romania; it goes in a great crescent through several countries.
Well, there are two. I mean, there are many people, two people particularly, who've written very beautifully, who've spent a lot of time in Romania. English people, both Bronwyn Riley and Will Blacker, who've spent a lot of time there and engaged, and they've both written very beautifully about what are clearly enormously complex social issues following.
Yes,
I mean, I'm simply not qualified to talk about whether Ceausescu was a good or a bad thing. But
no, obviously he was terrible. I was speaking with irony there, John. He was terrible, but strangely, it was rather like the trains running on time onto Mussolini. The forests were very well maintained under the communists, and it became a bit of an issue. It has become an issue as well since the fall.
And it's certainly the case. I mean, I likewise actually had been went last year to Mallinckrodt and did a sort of tour of buildings and things, and went there, and there was something completely magical about this great house right beside a wonderful fortified church with its with its wall paintings, altarpiece all intact, with I seem to remember the pastor. There's a pastor who's come back from Germany, a very nice woman who opened the church. I mean, it's really fascinating phenomenon. She was from, I think, former
But when we were there doing this sort of donning it up, there were different Romanians who had come, I mean, people of Romanian heritage who had come from the UK mostly. And, of course, as a naive person looking at this from the outside, I assumed, they'd all be getting on like, terribly well together and very keen on this project to show Romania as its best. But there was a big divide between those who were of Hungarian heritage and those who weren't. And the people who weren't saw this as Mallinckrodt as a symbol of oppression, because it was this Romanian, grand house for the local Romanian governor or some whatever, a gentry, family, which was at a different level from the ethnic Romanian. Yeah, so it just illustrates the complexity.
The complexity and the overlay of different groups and races and all these things. I mean, it's fascinating. Like everywhere in Central Europe, it's a melting pot. Possibly like everywhere.
Well, yes, maybe so. But two other things struck me. One was that the world is a very handmade one still, because there isn't the money. And I remember running into someone by the side of the road who had a whole lot of beehives. And these were beehives that he moved around in different locations according to where the honey was likely to be best, and selling them. And I said, well, this must be I was speaking through a translator. I said, this must be... It needed a little bit of brushing up at that stage. And I was saying this, must obviously be a difficult thing to do, because we had to move all the hives. He said, no, he put them on the back of his truck and everything. And he said the main problem was that the bears came out of the forest and ate the honey. So I thought that was interesting, a world which has long vanished from the UK. And you can wonderful sort of preserves and things which are made locally. This handmade world of wild fruit and stuff. So that was it. But also the repairs to the village is absolutely a continuity with the 18th century. They're just in exactly the same way. And people had great big tubs of quicklime in their basements. It's made from ground up limestone, isn't it, John? And then you slake it.
Yes, you heat it up and release the water, and then you slake it.
It heats naturally, doesn't it? There's the process.
when you add the water, you add the water, it reheats it. Exactly, it's very, very hot.
And it gets very, very hot. And in this country, it's regarded as being highly dangerous, and people have to go around in hazchem suits and things to handle it. But here, it's just in the basement of these houses full of children, and everybody knows what it is, so they take care.
And if you keep air out of it, it remains workable and usable. I mean, it's an
I didn't know that.
I think it's the carbon dioxide that sort of turns it back into a kind of limestone. But
this is really making the plaster. I mean, because the structure of these houses is wooden.
Yes.
Lath and plaster sometimes. Equivalent to wattle and daub, but it has
brick.
to have plaster. A brick
as
yes.
well.
But the plaster has to be applied to the wood so that it keeps the weather out. But, all these practices, the carpentry, for example, I mean, people still know how to do it.
Yes, and it is. I mean, you're quite right before talking about Marie Antoinette, because there is this very it must be a very hard life. There's no two ways about it in some ways, and yet to modernise to our eyes, coming from London or Western Europe, it feels somehow incredibly connected still to nature and delightful. I mean, this sense of a handmade.
I went to somewhere which was a bit similar in Poland once, and it was around Krakow, and there are lots. The structure of the landholding is there is that there are lots and lots of little small holdings for various reasons, and so this seems to be it's like sort of William Morris vision of the countryside with all these small holdings and people lending out their services to their neighbours on a sort of barter system. And it seemed completely idyllic. But, to the people living there, they were very keen that their children got educated. And the teachers kept on leaving because they didn't want to live in this backwater. And one of the people I talked to had just, they had very little land, 20 acres or something. Hectares. He just sold a portion of land so he could buy his child a computer, which was very important to them. But it made me realise that this way of life, which has huge qualities, and I thought looked extremely attractive to me, but actually is totally disconnected from the modern world.
And it is
and they don't want to be so disconnected as that.
And the grass is greener on the other side when you live
Yes.
one life. The grass is definitely greener on the other side of the fence.
Getting away for a week.
And it must be.
The roads in Romania, or at least certainly when I was there, they were absolute. I mean, in this part of Romania, in Transylvania, I mean, they were terrible. And a lot of people were still driving. I think the Roma particularly were still
ponies and traps. No, well, they are despairing gradually, and indeed, that is something that is changing. Well, we must come in the second half. I think we must come back to what the king has seen in this,
and how
he
to
has
explain to people listening, John, that in this high-tech studio in which we've now invested in a clock.
So Clive won't rudely cut me off in the middle of the sentence.
That was an accident, John.
Well, welcome back. And in this second part, we thought we would talk more about the king and his own particular interest in these buildings. We've tried to introduce Viscri as a place and Transylvania as a place. Neither of us are dyed in the wool experts in it, but we've both experienced its magic, because I think
it's magic. That's a very good way of putting it, John.
It is just extraordinarily magical, and I mean, maybe Clive, we could introduce a little bit about how the king sort of came to grips with it and what he did.
He went, I think, on a state visit and saw the villages in Transylvania, and he bought a couple of farmhouses. These as John was explaining in the first part, these farmhouses are all lined up one after another with these farmyards going deeply back
from the street.
Yeah, sort of towards the sort of open country and wooded and going up the hill. But
also these great areas of grazing land with all these wildflowers in it.
Yes.
I mean, the meadows are,
and
as Clive said, wonderful.
Scenes that you would never see in this country of flocks of ducks and geese, herds. Are they herds or flocks? Anyway, they're walking down the street because they come out of these farms. They're locked up in the farmyards at night, but in the daytime they just wander around this very broad village street, which is sort of somewhat undrained, I think. I mean, it's and the ponds.
And there's the stream going down.
Is a stream going down the side? I can't quite remember that.
It is, and with a drinking trough. I mean, one of the things.
Oh yes, and ladies selling things that they've knitted. You know, I can't believe that the trade in sort of knitted socks would be that brisk. A small village. But nevertheless, it's worth her sitting there.
It is. I mean, Viscri itself does attract quite a lot of visitors. One other thing it's worth saying which really struck me. I mean, I was taken to Romania, I suppose, in the very early 2000s by a friend, Bronwyn Riley, who knows it very well. And I remember we went to a place called Cluj, which I think means mud.
Oh, yes.
And it was a bit, in fact, a tiny village. There are lots of places, I think, called Cluj. And it was on a hillside, and there was a field. And in the field, there was a hollow stump driven into the ground from which water was welling. And it was naturally sparkling water in the middle of a field, just flowing over and sort of cattle moving around. And I remember looking over this landscape, and anywhere in northern Europe and in Western Europe, you would hear the sound of an engine or cars moving.
Yes.
And all you could hear in this silent scene were birds singing and silence, and human voices distantly. It's a completely different sort of. I mean, again, here we are, talking lyrically about something that is a product of poverty in many ways.
Yes, that's true. The second time I went, I took a sleeper from Vienna to Shigaswara.
Oh, yes, sweet.
And that was amazing. I thought that was going to be incredibly romantic. Actually, it was slightly clapped out, this sleeper, it has to be said. But when you woke up in the morning, you looked out, you were trundling through these derelict ex-communist factories. I mean, so there's quite a contrast of things you could see. And so this... but when you were in Transylvania, they have shepherds who live in the hills, as they would have done in this country, and I mean, a long, long time ago. And they have these gigantic dogs. You've got to be very careful, because these are dogs who fight off the wolves. I mean, they're really working dogs in every possible sense, and I think possibly the shepherds themselves brook no interference. So it's a bit tough.
But I mean,
anyway.
I mean, so in other words, it's this intoxicating thing, and the king was, when he went on the state visit, was clearly intoxicated by it.
Yes, he was. And it's very easy to imagine why. I mean, he bought a place in Viscri, or maybe he bought two places, and then I think he bought a third one. Well, he did buy a third one, but I think it might have been a little bit after, at somewhere called Zalanpatak, and I was lucky enough to stay there because, not when he was there, but they become places that you can go and stay, and somebody took me there. And so I'll remember that there's a meadow of wild crocuses just outside. I mean, he didn't plant them.
Yes,
I don't think.
They were there already.
It was, it's that sort of place. So it's easy to see why he would have fallen in love with it. And I think also he, I would imagine that he had a strong feeling that this is what we have lost in Britain.
That he's trying to put together, what you said before, his holistic view of it is that he's trying to mend the buildings, put it back, but it's not the buildings alone, it's part of this entire
culture.
It's a culture, but also a lifestyle, that the grazing of the meadows is crucial to the preservation of the meadows. You have to preserve all these different pieces, because if you begin to remove anything, then it no longer balances, there's no equilibrium.
I think he's also saying that there's something very precious here. There's something which is really which has a value in all senses. And actually I talked to the mayor of Viscri when I was there, who was a lady, and I think of Saxon heritage. She was one of the few people who'd stayed. And she felt the same thing, that, this would be a way forward, because I suppose essentially it would be tourism, or what we might call creating a brand, because the rest of Europe doesn't have it. All these things have been lost. And so the best way forward for villages like Viscri isn't just to modernise like mad and try to compete. It's doing the same things as other people. It's to say, look, you can come here and see something you're not going to see anywhere else.
Yeah, so it's a sort of...
So I think that's partly what the king might have in mind.
Well, I mean, I think that it is crucial, isn't it? For example, with the meadows, you can't mow those meadows, because if the if the plants rot back into the soil becomes too good for the flowers. So the only way of maintaining the meadows in this way is to graze them.
Yes.
And that means that you still need to have the people driving the cows out of the village every day. And then that means you still have to have the farms. I mean, that all these things...
I think some meadows, I'm sure, in fact, I can remember writing about it, these sort of rhubarb haystacks. People have scythed the meadows, with scythes.
No, it is. Well, certainly, I mean, certainly on my first visit, I mean, it may partly be a matter of the time that I went there, but, there were people ploughing with horses in the fields.
Amazing. It was absolutely extraordinary.
So, I mean, but it is this, I mean, all the time, coming back to this point, it feels prelapsarian, doesn't it?
Prelapsarian.
To someone from the UK, and yet...
Before the fall.
Before the fall. But it's
John,
complicated,
We ought to describe the Prince of Wales's houses.
Yes. Fire away. Come and use start ways.
Well, his house in Viscri is called the Blue House. It's painted blue. And it's very charming, as John was describing earlier, very simple wooden elements of classicism of a very vernacular kind. And it's been brilliantly restored so that the king can use it by Alireza Sagacci of Stand-Up Gate Architects. And as much as possible has been kept, but some new buildings have been created. There's a library, for example. That's one of Alireza's buildings, isn't it?
There's a barn, and he rebuilt the barn using, I think, original elements from the building. Extended it, and it has exhibitions in it.
Yes.
About local crafts and
then it's been decorated. I think that Count Tibor Kolnaki.
That's exactly right.
Is very instrumental in this because he is a Romanian who went back after the fall of communism, and I think he reclaimed his estates or he reclaimed castles, but he still has to work to maintain them. And I think he's been very instrumental. And his wife, I think, was responsible for the decoration. But the decoration is so nice. It's been drawn entirely from kind of Romanian craft. Many of these things, like the lace and the textiles and the wooden furniture, I don't think this is necessarily particularly old because I think it's still all being made.
Well, I think some of it has also been done in the style of, I mean, it feels like a sort of late 19th century farmstead in parts. I mean, there are some beautiful things and some are obviously new, but I think there's been an attempt to redecorate it in a way that it might have existed when it was a Saxon farmstead, hasn't it? And yes, these curious chests of drawers where you pull out the drawer and it turns out to be a bed inside it, which, I mean, rather amazing.
I've forgotten about that.
Yes, I mean, there's sort of all these...
But it's very, very attractive, isn't it?
And there is a little shop, I think, in this building as well now where you can buy absolutely wonderfully made local things. I have a little set of coffee cups that I bought when I was there, and I came away with them. They're much admired, and they delight the family. So that's all I've...
A lot of painted furniture,
and painted furniture.
But simple.
And
also extremely charming.
Fabrics covering furniture, both laces and also woven textiles. And I mean, you go through, so you walk through the gateway, and you're in the courtyard. You've got the exhibition space straight ahead. You've got the house, on your left. It's an enclosed area. But then, I mean, you can go beyond it, and there's a garden, and then that actually opens, if my memory serves me correctly, into the meadows, which enclose the village,
into the woods,
and they rise up. I mean, it is amazing that again it doesn't really feel as though there are roads that kind of cut you off from any part of the landscape. No. Which is what you feel, so often.
It's open landscape, isn't it? Because when you're actually in amongst the mountains, or
you can just walk and walk and walk.
Because there aren't any fences.
There are no fences, no gates.
That's the difference from what it would have been in this country.
It just breaks into woodland, and you just these tracks.
These are endless meadows. I don't quite know how they divide the use of these meadows up between the different farmers. But anyway, it's absolutely wonderful and totally unobstructed.
And I tried to, I was
told that one visit, the then Prince of Wales said that he'd heard that the bastard toadflax could be found, and he'd been wanting to see the bastard toadflax for
And if you walking out,
he went looking for the bastard Tupacs.
And I mean, his own interest has clearly spawned and supported a huge amount of local interest, and many people coming back. Indeed, as you say, people who'd left Romania, Romanians themselves who've long established families in Romania. It's sort of inspired a whole network of charitable organisations that are trying to support different things like the Eminescu Trust, and also this, I can't now remember its name exactly, but the ambulance for buildings, this ambulanza, which I visited, in fact, with Jeremy Musson and the photographer Paul Hynam writing it up in Country Life. But we went to a neighbouring village of Rodesh, which I've already mentioned, where the church tower has partly collapsed, and there's this amazing project. We went up on the scaffold inside the church and looked at all these volunteers actually rebuilding this massive high-pitched roof. It was very exciting to see that, the church, again, just as in Viscri, commanding the village. And I think that's also something that's, certainly been warmly supported by the king when he was into Wales.
Well, I think that he's taken very concrete steps to encourage craft. I can't quite remember how it operates, but young people can spend time there to learn the techniques to do with line plastering and woodwork, and these are taught in order to perpetuate the tradition, the building tradition, which I think is a wonderful thing. And he also, he can't stop. He can't stop doing things which are very, very helpful. But I mean, he's meant to be there for relaxation, but actually he keeps going. And he has to do things to help. So I think there's another charity that he's been behind, which has been to encourage local other types of local craft work, and not just craft work, but local industries. For example, I think I'm right in saying, I think this was something I visited there, or can't quite remember, might have been in Poland, but people who make local products for the table, because Romania is part of the European Union, and I dare say that European Union rules aren't applied as brutally as they were in this country before Brexit, but still they have to keep up with the hygiene standards, understandably. But people who might have been making something in a kitchen which only had one sink, or didn't have enough sophisticated refrigeration, have been helped to upscale. Because you have to have two sinks in a kitchen to meet EU standards, and that kind of thing. So I think, and so all these wonderful local jams that are being made, and there's a shop which sells them. I think I seem to remember being taken to that,
and things,
and it was all a wonderful thing. Whether it could be of a scale actually to make the difference, and sometimes there's a sense of the boy with his finger in the leaking dam.
I mean, I mean, it's also worth saying
21st century is about to burst
through. I mean, we see all this obviously with British eyes looking to Romania, and it seems exotic and wonderful. But I mean, do you think there's also a way in which Romania has shaped the king's vision of what he's doing in Britain? That in fact there's a sort of, we see it as him going out there and doing that, but are there in fact quite important ways in which his experience of Romania has shaped his own projects in Britain, do you think?
Well, I think they're coterminous, and I think that he's always been setting up trusts and ways to help people. But I think it's particularly demonstrable at Dumfries House, which we're going to go and talk about in the next episode, aren't we, John?
We are, and that's sort of in a totally different context, a different social vision, isn't it? And yet it has definite points of comparison and has been informed, I think.
Yes, I mean, it's the other side of the coin in a sense, because Dumfries House, of course, it's a Georgian country house designed by Robert Adam, but it's in an area which is post-industrial, because the big employer were the deep mines, which were closed down in the 1980s. And so there's been more than one generation of unemployment. It's in a very poor part of the country, East Ayrshire in Scotland. And there was a standoff, really, between the owners, the Buttes, who used to own Dumfries House and the local community, who only got into the park to sort of bash it up and sort of kick the railings of the balustrade of the bridges into the water and that sort of thing, because there was no identity between these the community and the people who owned the big house. Whereas Prince Charles's vision has been to restore Dumfries House, and you might think, well, come on, we haven't got enough Georgian country houses to look at, but that's only part of it. He's made the estate into an extraordinary series of craft schools and centres of hospitality to train people in cooking and in looking after people. And there's an agricultural school. I mean, it's really extraordinary what he's done, but he's done it to give hope to this local community through the opportunities that are offered. It's really absolutely extraordinary. So it's the same sort of idea as...
It's an attempt at a holistic solution to a place.
But I think they're very much different sides of the same coin.
Yes,
in that, as you rightly said, Romania is prelapsarian and Dumfries House
is post-lapsarian. And trying to solve the two. And I think, it's also worth saying, both of us have been to Romania, and it is such a magical place, really, and as a place just to, however you choose to characterise it, whether for us it's nostalgia or whatever, but it there is something, it feels so different.
Yes, and great sense of fragility, I think. I
think you're right. Yes, you're right. And but the things to be seen there, whether it's the painted churches, in northern Romania, or these fortified villages in Transylvania, or Sighișoara itself, which is itself a sort of magical. It feels like a city in the background of a Dürer painting with the cathedral.
Yes, absolutely.
On top.
Yes.
They're all.
That's a very good way of putting it.
They're sort of. It just feels it's wonderfully different as a place to go to. It has a totally different, very strong character of its own, and in a world where you can travel so far and feel as though you've not really moved very much between cultures, it has a totally different flavour.
Yes. I suppose something we haven't touched on, looking at this new clock that we have and seeing that we have time,
yes,
is that the villages are vulnerable really through this change of population, because the Saxons who had built them, very hard-working and structured and organised and blah, blah, blah. They've largely, 90% of them left. And into the vacuum very often came Roma, or as they used to be called, but we can't say it anymore, gypsies. And they live in a different kind of way. And that's partly why you see so many people driving horses and carts, because that's very much part of the Roma tradition, and still a living one, which you see in this country too. But they don't have any great feeling of affinity with these villages. They weren't the people who built them.
And that's, I suppose, part of the point of the king's drive has also been diplomatic in a sense, and so these trusts and various charities, that it's also a diplomatic effort, isn't it? It's trying to persuade people that these things do have a value.
Yes.
In parts of Romania too, that sense of the resurgence of the Orthodox Church is reflected in lots of new Orthodox churches being built. And of course, the Lutheran churches of these fortified villages, in a way, they scarcely have a local congregation anymore.
Yes.
Somewhere like Malencrov,
Yes, how interesting.
In fact, with the change of population, it's seen as being part of a different culture. And yet the Church of Malencrov, is particularly important, isn't it? With this extraordinary cycle of 15th century paintings in the chancel, this magnificent 15th century altarpiece. It's really, it's a major building in a way. And yet it doesn't obviously have a congregation anymore in quite the same way. I think that's odd also because it was a Hungarian owner at Malencrov, I think you mentioned.
Yes.
And he remained Catholic rather than the Lutheran churches such as Rodeš, where, these churches they go from being Catholic to being Lutheran, and they have a very different atmosphere somehow internally.
But in many ways, the attention that the king is attracting to Transylvania is very positive. At least it shows that there could be a way for the people who live there, and it is a very poor area, as you said, and it can't be too much emphasised, really, that it's even in Romania, which is not a very rich country, it's different from the rest of the country. But, of course, by attracting attention to somewhere, that is itself liable to raise challenges. I mean, I believe that in the very building next door to the king's blue house in Viscri is one that was bought by a Swiss gentleman. And the Swiss gentleman has built... I mean, this is what happens, of course, if you have somebody like the king, it, of course, encourages other people who are quite interested, and to have these. I think even now these farmhouses don't cost very much. To have somewhere which is next door to the king, you can see it would be quite a sort of thing to talk about, wouldn't it? And so he's built this tower, and the king is furious, I'm told, because it can look into his farmyard, which of course is not good news at all.
From his point of view.
From his point of view. But of course, this is like a little village dispute. I mean, I dare say that the king has been sheltered from them. But neighbours falling out in villages is something which has happened to the rest of the population for hundreds of years.
Well, when we visited, I mean, I have to say, we were very generously hosted by Nicolau Ratiu, who's involved with the Enescu Trust. But they've created a place where you can stay very, very comfortably. And there was quite a large party of artists who had come to paint. And in the morning, when the cows were being driven down the main road, there were lots of people painting the scene. Yes. I mean, it was rather wonderful. With a stork's nest on the village school.
Yes, stork.
But there's no question. You haven't plunged off into a place where nobody else from the outer world ever goes anymore. I mean, there's still a fairly limited number of people who go, but it's definitely something that's
very
known, and the king has made it known.
But of course, that's the kind of tourism which is beneficial, isn't it? Because these are people who go because they want to experience what is there and what's special and respect it.
Yes.
And celebrate it through their paintings.
Yes, and ultimately I think that, the experience of seeing these things, it goes back to what you were saying of the mayor of the town, saying that we have something very special here and we need to preserve it in its own terms, and it's very special. We're not going to try and do what everybody else has done. We're going to try and exploit what we actually have. And it seems in that context eminently sensible. And as I say, certainly I feel enormously grateful to have seen it and to have been able to enjoy it. It's completely marvellous.
We'd better go back, John. I was going to when I went the first time, already the second time, the children were quite a lot younger, and I was so keen to take them there, to show them this, because it is something they could not experience anywhere else. I found it difficult to get family buy-in. It would be so cheap. You could just go off a Wizz Air.
And go and see it all. Yeah.
Yes. Of course, some of these hostelries, where you can stay, which are lovely, they're not necessarily run by Romanians. Sometimes they are rather idealistic Germans, for example. That's the one
who've gone back, yes.
Who'd seen that this was somewhere that spoke to them. But they're not necessarily descendants of the original owners, for instance.
Well, I think, rounding this off, I suppose all I would say is if you're tempted to go to Romania, definitely do, because I think you will have an absolutely magical time, and it's sort of wonderful to see, and it just feels so different. But I think both of us very impressed by what we saw, and in many ways quite unfamiliar architecturally from the kinds of things we normally look at, but as an experience, and as a holistic experience.
Indeed.
Partly
and
through the
John, we shall continue to bang on about the king
in the next episode. In another episode, and we'll talk about Dumfries House, which Clive has already mentioned. Yes. We look forward to it.
And we hope you've enjoyed listening to our podcast. If you have, don't feel shy of reviewing it, leaving a 5-star rating if you feel so moved.
Or not reviewing it if you don't.
Oh, yeah. Good point. What else do we have to say? We have a website that we're very proud of, which is www.ypompod.com, and you can find out, you can sign up to a newsletter, which is rather a new thing. We're not quite sure how we're going to do it, but we will be telling you about everything that's coming up and what we're doing, and we will be sharing photographs there when we find out how we can.
Yes, and showing photographs of the various buildings that we've been talking about. Very good.
Yes.
Excellent.
What else? Was there something else we had to say?
I don't think so.
We'll leave it there.